Okay, everyone, welcome into the space. Welcome to Matara, Mahamudra practice. Um, Welcome to those who are new with us for the first time in the space. Welcome. This is the beginning of our monthly Tara practice. It might be some other stuff too. But the first half of our time, the first hour and a half will be Tara, and then the second hour and a half will be our steps. And there'll be a break in between. I think there are people who are just coming for the sit in particular. Um, but in any case, welcome everyone. Welcome to everyone returning. This is our guided practice session with the practice of Tara. Um, and we are today, this is uh, St. Valentine's Day, which is wonderful. And this is the Lunar New Year as well. So the Lunar New Year.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened.
Oh, and Karen, you can go ahead and mute yourself as well. I think you hear you. All right. Hey, Karen. There we go. Okay. So let's move into our Matara practice this morning. And this was something we were doing pretty regularly through last fall, through late summer last fall, and then I had to reimagine the practices as they were, kind of unsustainable to do for me every Sunday because it takes, a lot of effort, a lot of energy to do it. But I think, the practice of Tara today, particularly on a day like Valentine's Day, I think is really appropriate. Not that I buy into this whole like commodification of love, and so forth. But, I think it's just, for me, it's just a day to remind myself of the power, the role of love and compassion, you know, as well. Often I'm using love and compassion interchangeably anyway these days. And I know that's a big Buddhist taboo to do that, but for me, it's just, I don't know. I don't know if compassion can really exist without love. I don't know if love can actually exist without compassion. But that's kind of part of this evolving and thinking that I'm doing, discernment actually, around what I mean by certain things. And I think maybe we do too much to differentiate the energy of love and compassion too much. And maybe it's really the same energy. Um, Often we define love as, well, traditionally, in the Buddhist perspective, it's defined as the wish for ourselves and others to be happy, to be free from harm. And compassion is really the wish for people to be free from harm. And I think compassion is also, yes, compassion is much more kind of focused around suffering. And love tends to be more focused around the comfort, the happiness that we want people to experience. Sometimes it begins to blur for me. Again, as I was just saying, that sometimes when I'm expressing love, I'm also really concerned with the suffering of people in the world. I'm concerned with my suffering. When I love people, when I love myself, I want them to be safe, to be free, right? In the same way, I express compassion. You know, I think love can be a vehicle for deep empathy, as we've often explored in compassion, where compassion, the root of compassion is itself empathy, right? Empathy meaning that we begin to connect to our own discomfort as well as the discomfort of the world and of people, you know, in the world. Um, you know, and once we connect through empathy, then we make a choice to abide with the discomfort. And often in my language, I call abiding sympathy. So sympathy is when I linger with, I stay with my suffering and suffering of others. Um, and then that lingering, that sympathy can open up into this wish for people to be free from the suffering. Now, that wish arises out of our recognition that we don't want to suffer. So it's the self-empathy piece and the self-sympathy is really important because that's the foundation from which we begin to develop that's our experience as a lived experience of suffering, right? And when we live with that experience, when we pay attention to that experience, then we begin to recognize that, maybe we don't want to have this experience, right? Maybe we don't want to be suffering. Like we don't want to be uncomfortable. We don't want to be victims of violence. We don't want to be victims of microaggressions, and we don't want to be victims of being erased or ignored, all kinds of things. Like whatever that suffering is, we don't want to experience it. And I think that sometimes, along that same line, I think sometimes we can definitely look at experiences of others, and we see that sometimes people do want to suffer. We do choose suffering. And I think that choosing suffering is something that is very much aligned with Buddha Dharma. That Dharma actually really points out that we are choosing suffering. We are choosing suffering by not doing the work to develop clarity. Our ethical care, which of course means wisdom and compassion, right? So we're choosing suffering by engaging or making certain choices that actually perpetuate delusion, and it feeds into overconsumption and desire, and those choices are not tending to or taking care of the hurt, of the suffering. And then we get really trapped in that cycle of choosing suffering, which is what samsara is. It's the choosing of delusion over and over and over and over again, until we kind of break that habitual pattern of choosing delusion, right? And this doesn't mean that we're not having fun. Like it's not that, let me get comfortable for you. I feel like I'm Oprah on the Oprah show. I'm getting comfortable. I bought this chair that I'm sitting on. It's called a half chair, specifically to do talking in, so I can get really comfortable as well. But anyway, we make these choices over and over again. It reminds me of this poem that many people have heard. The Theravadins love to talk about this poem, the Insight Meditators. And the poem is it's about someone who's walking down a sidewalk and they see a hole and they walk into the hole. And they get out of the hole and they say, why did I walk into a hole that I saw? And then the next scene is same person walking down the hall, walking down a sidewalk, seeing that same hole again, and saying, oh, I shouldn't walk into the hole, and then walks into the hole anyway. Gets out of the hole and say, I saw the hole, I knew it was a hole. Why did I not walk around it? Okay. Then the third part, and I'm paraphrasing, there may be more parts in this, but the last part is like the same person is walking up to the same sidewalk, and then walks down the sidewalk, sees the hole, says there's a hole, and then walks around it. Actually, that's not the last scene. I think this is the last scene. The last scene is the person walking up to the sidewalk and just saying, fuck it, I'm just gonna like walk down another sidewalk and not even deal with having to dodge a hole. I mean, the poem doesn't say fuck it, because if it said fuck it, no one in the insight tradition would be reading it. Anyhow, I really like that poem because it really, for me, it highlights the ways in which I've had to push against, reprogram myself to choose different ways of being, choosing different ways to not choose the same old shit that gets me into trouble all the time, the same old habitual ways of reacting, the same old, ways that I choose certain relationships. Some of the ways that, I keep going back to the places that hurt me. Another kind of, and these are like, when I talk about these kinds of like references, like when I reference poems or movies or shows and so forth, for those of you who study, who practice the 7 homecomings, I'm talking about the wisdom text part of the 7 homecomings, right? So when we talk about wisdom text, calling into your space the energy of cultural artifacts that help us to experience clarity, art, poems, music, pop culture. If these things, these references, these things that we like really help us to experience clarity and help us to make a different choice, to be well, to be happy, and to be free, then these are your dharmas. These are your wisdom texts, which is how I translate dharma in the 7 homecomings. Your text of clarity, your artifacts, these things in the world, these phenomena. It's phenomena in the world that evokes wisdom, clarity, that helps you to make better choices, right? And maybe a movie, it may be a song, it may be a painting, it may be other things, teaching, scriptures, ideas, beliefs, philosophies. And we may work with that as we get into the practice today. We may work with the 2nd homecoming of wisdom text a lot more. So I'm feeling called to do more of that. But the next thing I was going to reference is for color girls who considered suicide with a rainbow isn't enough. I'm thinking about some of like the monologues in that play. In this place, it's a lyric poem. It's a poem. It's a poem about the suffering, the love, the liberation of Black women. And there's one narrative. Actually, you can see it in the movie, even though the movie's kind of trash, but it does have Janet Jackson in it. So that's one of the redeeming factors. But I think it's Loretta Devine's monologue. I think Loretta Devine is like the woman, and it didn't really go by the names that you would find in the play. But anyway, her last monologue, so she's been in this relationship in the movie, her character, with someone who, just really manipulates her, is cheating on her and so forth. And finally she gets to this point where she's like, enough, boundaries. She sets these boundaries. And one of the things that she says is that, again, paraphrasing, I'm tired of walking back to the places. I'm tired of being projected upon, and this is a paraphrase, again, it's not the exact words, but she's basically saying, I'm tired of choosing the person who keeps hurting me over and over again, and choosing you only because I'm afraid to be alone, or I'm afraid that there's no one else in the world who's going to choose me, and therefore I get locked in this illusion of non-choice. That the fear keeps bringing me back to making certain choices, that is always hurting me, right? So the poem about the hole in the sidewalk comes much more into perspective when we have that kind of, like, for me, when I have that kind of artifact and thinking about that kind of thing, where it's like, oh, I keep walking into this hole because there are these circumstances that keep leading me into the hole, right? There's the fear, there's the trauma. Trauma is a cycle. Trauma is samsara. There's just like a cycle that perpetuates itself over and over and over again until we disrupt, right? To disrupt that energy. To be liberated from trauma, to be liberated from samsara, is to disrupt cycles of trauma in our minds and in our bodies, but continuing to go back into that hole, to fall into it over and over again, means that we have to disrupt a cycle and circumstances that lead us into that hole, knowing very well what we're doing. Like, we know very well what's happening in the moment, right? And so it gets complicated. Like, there's a complication here around getting into true compassion, and really moving through the steps of compassion, moving from empathy to sympathy, right? And then moving into externalizing that attention, because it begins with ourselves. Then we look out into the world, we look into the lives of others, and we begin to do the same empathy and sympathy. And then we come back to our experience and say, you know what, I don't want to suffer, right? And again, that's also the struggle there, because we have to name the suffering for ourselves. Like, we have to name that we're suffering and that we can do something different. If we can't do that, we can't get into compassion. We can't get into compassion. I hope y'all are taking notes, because this is like brilliant. I'm like surprising myself. I'm like, oh, I've never actually said some of this before, right? It's a good thing this is being recorded as well. So another reason we're on Crowdcast now is that we have these recordings that we can go back and listen to and look at. So I'll be going back and listening to this as well. I do often go back, not as much now, but like in the past few years, I've had this habit of going back and re-listening to talks and everything, because in the moment of teaching, there are things that I express that I need to hear again for myself, for my own dharma, for my own learning as well. And that's been, you become your own teacher after a while. You do. I am one of my own teachers as well. But anyhow, going back to the suffering, we have to learn to identify suffering, discomfort, dis-ease as suffering, and for me, that piece took years of practice to do. It took years of practice of understanding that this wasn't just my life, that this wasn't just what was supposed to be happening. That was just this feeling of just being unwell wasn't normal. But for years, I'd considered it normal. For years, I'd been clinically depressed, since, who knows since when, since I was Black, which was like my whole life. But definitely, I had, since high school and moving through college, I was definitely depressed in college, right? I didn't name that for myself in college, but it was definitely the case. I didn't really identify depression until my mid-20s. But when I started looking at depression, with the help of others and with the help of meditation, I was like, oh, like, this isn't normal. right? This suffering that I've been in, I've normalized it, and once you normalize something, it becomes invisible for us. And it's hard to touch. This is also the struggle with white supremacy. Actually, it's the struggle with any identity location based on privilege, right? Because the privilege becomes normal, right? Ask a fish how the water is, and the fish goes, "What water?" Right? You know, um, if it's like when we ask, many of you identify as white in the space. When we ask white people, "How's whiteness?" You're like, "What? What whiteness?" I'm not racialized. And that's one of the main reasons whiteness remains dominant, right? And if you're confused about that, go back and look at the impeachment trial from this week, to see, how dominant whiteness is, right? But it's the same, again, for any identity, location, and privilege, where the privilege itself becomes normalized. And I would argue that for those of us at intersections that's weighted more towards oppression, marginalization, there's a normalizing of this privilege as well. There's a normalizing of oppression that, oh, this is how things are, right? And I definitely got that when I was growing up, here in Georgia, where it was like, oh, like this is just the way Black lives are held, right? This is just how my life is going to be. I'm just going to be a perpetual victim of microaggressions and police brutality and prejudice and discrimination. I'll always be followed around in a store. I'll always, be considered to be less than human, to be stupid, and you're just like, oh, yeah, this is normal, right? And then in my case, as someone who, even though I didn't really, even though I don't really believe this, as someone who excelled at certain things, growing up, and people will look at me, white people and Black people will look at me and go, oh, you're special because you're Black and you can make an A in a class, or you speak really articulately. Apparently I don't now. I have articulates, but I can speak the Queen's English in more ways than one, I think. But I wasn't speaking the Queen's English. Queen's English is a second dialect that I learned when I realized I was gay as fuck. That's another Dharma talk. It's just like, you just think it's normal, right? And it's normal to be considered special because you do things that all these other white people do really well. You say, okay, well, it's just kind of how it is, right? And then, for me, getting into my mid-20s and having started meditation, not really so much into Buddhism back then, but I was just doing just basic practice, mindfulness practice, and just, bringing in like all these years of all the social criticism and Black prophetic stuff that I've been doing and reading and studying, and how all of that was coming, into this critical awareness, this critical consciousness, as Bell Hooks talks about, where I begin to say, oh, okay, like this discomfort now that I'm beginning to recognize through my meditation and have always kind of known about through the social criticism work, right? All that isn't normal, that this is like something that I can move through, that I can make workable in my practice. And that was the shift, that was the transformation, when I consciously decided to start choosing joy, right? To choose the joy, to choose the happiness. And that comes from learning how to choose and to be within the spaciousness around everything. That space is the expression of the mother, right? It's the mother principle in tantric traditions, right? The mother, the female, feminine discipline, or the female expression, right? And once we get into like that level of energy, it's not about gender, it's not about sex. These are words that we're using that are not adequate to talk about these ultimate forms of being. But we use these words, and sometimes these words get in the way. The words point us somewhere, but we keep taking a lot of relative meaning closer and closer to the ultimate. And the ultimate will actually throw it back in your face and say, I don't know what you're talking about, right? I know that some of you have had experiences where you've entered into emptiness, into the divine. You've had these experiences, and those experiences can't be articulated. Though we use language to point us towards the experience, the language isn't the experience to begin with. So when we talk about the mother, we understand that we're all expressions of the mother, right? And that no matter how we express gender and are outside of the binary, we still all express, or I would say we contain the seeds, the experiences of the qualities of the mother, the spaciousness, the nurturing, right? And to learn to trust that as well. When you talk about the mother, like I know sometimes we're like, well, a lot of Westerners are like, well, I had a really difficult relationship with my mother. We're not talking about your mother. We're not talking about my mother, right? We're talking about the mother, right? That experience that transcends the relative trauma, of a relative understanding of parenthood or mothership or guardianship or what have you, right? To transcend the trauma of the relative meaning and understanding, to rest within an expression that is wide open, spacious, empty, warm. And so we have to choose that, right? You have to learn to choose the space. You have to learn to move from a space of contraction and shutting down into the space of openness, And what that means is that we have to start letting go of the people we thought we were, We have to start letting go of our old selves, our traumatized self, our cynical self, our angry self, our hateful self. And we have to struggle and push back against the ways in which we're deeply, overwhelmingly self-identifying with these qualities that we have thought have defined us in the past. Because when we self-identify with something like the trauma or the hate, right? Or the anger, which if you've read Love and Rage, you sat with me in the course maybe, that like it's not about self-identifying with the anger. That's not the path of liberation through anger. It's recognizing anger as this experience held within this expansive spaciousness, right? So it's not about self-identifying. You can't get free if you're always self-identifying with anything, even with the deity. I can say, well, I am Tara, which is true, but it's much more truthful to say that Tara is an experience of who I am. It's one of the experiences. That the experience, like when we say something is an experience, it points us back to the space. Always, it points us back to the space. This is an experience. You can't have an experience because there's no space for the experience to happen. So I think compassion has to be demystified. This like grand thing is really compassion is really about developing the courage and the capacity to be with our own discomfort, to be with our own suffering and trauma. This is what we mean. It's like, You're talking about, oh, how am I going to love and have compassion for someone? Well, you begin with yourself. That's actually the hardest thing to do. The hardest practice, is to develop compassion and love for self, right? To learn to accept ourselves, to learn to want ourselves to be safe, to be free from suffering, to do that, and knowing that like we keep making the choices over and over again that perpetuate discomfort for us. It was Pablo Neruda. It was one of my favorite lines in the poem, or one of my favorite lines in literature in general, is that, and again, paraphrasing, I love you as certain dark things are loved. And that really, particularly when I became a practitioner, that really took on a different meaning. It's like, oh, like I'm really, there's a fierce attachment to things that are really not good for me, and I keep choosing those things. And I want to love the qualities of liberation, the tools of liberation, as much as I love the dark things. Of course, we have to figure out what that darkness is for us as well. Some of us love hate. That's like where we're at. We don't even know that we're doing loving hate, but we're hateful, right? We hate. There's actual hate. There's actual intense aversion, resistance to something in our experience, or to the world around us, right? And we self-identify. It's like, well, I don't care for certain people. I don't care for certain things, and that's hate. And when you hate something or someone, then you rob that person or that thing of agency. And when something has no agency, it becomes an object. When something's an object, we feel as if we can dominate that object, and to do whatever we want. And that object, that person, that person no longer is human, right? And we can talk about that as being the principal colonizing settler mentality. I was talking about America. That was the principal ethic, is that the land, the people had no agency. The only agency back then was this kind of Western civilized agency, Westerners. It was, Westerners, Europeans, right? Were the humans, and then the land and everyone else who wasn't European, were objects robbed of agency, right? And how that continues to perpetuate that self, how that continues to perpetuate itself in our experiences as we relate to other people in the world. We have to be very careful, particularly with the people that we really don't like, people maybe who have hurt us, right? Like people who have hurt us, who have been a source of violence for us. We have to be very careful not to rob them of humanity, because we begin to reflect the same thing back to them that they're reflecting and projecting onto us, right? And again, compassion is what restores this quality of humanity for all people. If we can't do that, then we're not going to get free. You're not going to get free until you love everyone, right? Until there's compassion for everyone and everything. Like you can't get to these stages of enlightenment if you're pushing something away. And this is the contradiction. This is what the intense training is all about. And some of you aren't ready for this in this life, and that's fine. This is a multi-lifetime practice being situated within a kind of life form, or a life that can do this heavy, heavy labor of moving into the contradictions that opens up when we're being asked to love everything and everyone, and that loving everything means that everything is held within the spaciousness of our minds, that nothing is pushed out. We're not talking about liking. You're talking about loving. I don't like everything that I hold space for, but I love it, and that means it deserves to be there. And it deserves to be free. The spaciousness is the freedom, that we're offering all of these things. And it's hard to hold space for something if it's wrapped around our experience of trauma as well. Again, I just want to point out too, this, like, we're not trying to completely heal the trauma in order to get free. We're trying to hold space for everything, to let everything be in our experience, to develop the quality, the capacity just to look. This is Mahamudra, right? Just to look, to see, and like, there you are. And you're disrupting the ways in which we're reacting. And when we disrupt reactivity, then we start cultivating the quality of responding. It's like, yeah, I can hold space for everything. That doesn't make me passive, right? Because actually what I'm working towards is wisely, lovingly responding in a way that reduces harm, that reduces violence, right? So as we move closer to awakening and enlightenment, you have to move through that experience. You have to move into that experience of saying, oh, everything. Everything must be held. Everything must be loved. I have to have compassion for everything. And don't say, well, I'm just going to wait to the next life to do this work, because you're not guaranteed, anything that, is next, right? You, as we often say, it's like we let go of fruition, we let go of agendas and just do the work, and you get as much work as you've done. It's like taking a timed test, and you get like a certain amount of time to do a test, and then that time is over and pencils down, right? It's like, okay, I did as much as I could, but I worked. It may have taken me a long time. I may have gotten stuck on certain things, but I was working the whole time. And that's what we need to focus on. We just need to be working and let go of our need to get anywhere. Again, this is incredibly important as we move deeper into this period, as we continue through this transition, where it's, where we're trying to be reborn, essentially we're trying to be reborn, by letting go of the things that we don't need anymore, like beginning to make different choices. We don't have to keep walking into the same old holes over and over again because that's the only thing that we know, or because fear drives us in. It's no longer a good excuse to be driven by fear. Yes, it's powerful, but you have to try harder. And fear is something that no teacher can take away. No realized teacher can take fear away from you. A teacher can show up to support you and to offer you the tools, but it's you who's having to consume the fear. In the teaching of Majjhima Bhagavati, it's like you have to consume the chaos, or the chaos begins to consume you, right? So I can let dark things consume me, or I can consume the dark things itself. So let's practice. Let's do some practice now. Please come back and watch the recording. I know some people have to leave. Whenever you live in the South, you have to make sure you have your mason jar to drink out of. This was actually an accident. So I was actually using mason jars to store food in, And then I needed a cup for water to drink out of, and I just grabbed this and I started drinking out of it, and then the rest is history. Okay. It started working. I started doing a little bit of work with the mother, and then I'll leave lots of space for questions. I think hopefully, hopefully we'll get a good 15 or 20 minutes for questions. Okay. So let's just begin. Allow yourself to come into a position that feels appropriate for you to sit. I'm just going to do a short, maybe 20-minute practice. Let's shift our intention into some intention. So developing an intention and aspiration for your practice. Why am I practice? Whom am I practicing for? All right. If you're able to today, I invite you to shift some attention to the breath, just noticing the in breath and the out breath, in and out. Allowing the breath to slow down, to elongate. Allowing the breath to breathe you. When you're ready, shifting your attention down to the heart center. You can move through your gratitude practice or devotion practice. In gratitude practice, we reflect on people or things that we're grateful for, or we reflect on how we are the recipients of this boundless kinds of compassion, labor, and kindness from so many people around us, so many beings around us, all for our well-being and support. And our devotion practices reflecting on, the kindness, the love of our mentors and guides and teachers and gurus and so forth. allowing that energy of gratitude to awaken in the heart center, allowing that energy to begin to circulate from the heart center throughout the body and the mind. Mhm. Turning our attention to the space around us, we begin to invite into our space our benefactors. So if you practice the 7 homecomings, inviting the homecomings, the sources of refuge into the space, but in general, inviting our teachers and guides and mentors, our communities, any deities, saints, ancestors who are benevolent and helpful, inviting the earth, anything that's a benefactor for us, even nature is our benefactor. Our experience of God to the space as well. Imagine that they come to sit around you in a circle of care. Once you have a sense of your benefactors sitting around you, begin to imagine that they begin to radiate the energy of care into the space around you. And again, this energy of care can be like the energy of care maybe you received sometime in the past, a moment where you felt deeply cared for or tended to or loved. And imagining that this is the same energy that your circle of care is radiating into the circle towards you. So as this energy is beginning to fill the space around you and it begins to wrap around you, I'm going to invite us to move into our first mantra today, which is Om Matara Soha, just evoking the Mother Tara, and beginning to recognize this energy of care around us as the expression of the Mother. So you can chat with me or you can sit and listen. But again, Om Matara Soha. Right? Om Matara Soha. Om Matara Soha. Om Matara Soha. And just beginning to imagine that the energy around you is the Mother appearing in the form of this care being radiated from your benefactors. Matter of fact, looking at your circle of benefactors, I invite you to begin to imagine that these benefactors are all just emanations, expressions of Mother Tara, seeing them in any way that feels appropriate and creative. But these mothers are radiating their enlightened consciousness, this energy of care into the space around us. And slowly we begin to absorb that energy of care. And it sinks into our skin, our muscles, our bones, our tissue. And soon this energy of care is just deeply saturating every part of both our bodies and our minds. And within our heart centers, we begin to imagine that within our heart centers, the Mother begins to arise. We can imagine that in the heart center, an image of Tara emerges, or whomever or whatever we consider a divine image of the Mother to be for us in this moment. And that the Mother arises within the wide open, boundless spaciousness of our heart center. And as we sit with being surrounded and saturated by this care, this energy of the mother, and imagining the mother appearing in our heart center, we move into our mantra, Om Tare Tutare Ture Soha. And just sitting, you can chant along with the mantra, or just like sit and listen, but just feeling, allowing the energy of the mother to be present with us, and allowing ourselves to be cared for and tended to by this energy and this mantra. Om Tare Tutare Ture Soha. Os Om Tare Tutare Ture Om Tare Tutare Ture tare tu re so tare tu 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 tare tu re so and in this space that we've opened up in the practice, I invite you to begin to offer your prayers into this caring essence of the mother, as she may be expressing herself as Tara. What are you aspiring for? What do you hope for? Who needs to be tended to and healed and guided from this realm into the spirit realm? Begin to offer your prayers, articulating those prayers for yourself, and then just offering the energy of these prayers into the spaciousness of your mind, which is the same essence of the mother. And when we do that, we evoke the energy of the mother to begin to move on our behalf. Slowly we begin to shift our attention back into the space around us to notice our circle of care as they are emanating as expressions of Mother Tara. And we thank the mothers for their care, their love for us. And we begin to imagine that the circle of caring Taras, of caring mothers, begins to dissolve into white light. That white light is absorbed into our heart center to fuse with the mother who is already there within the heart center. We turn our attention to that mother in our heart center, thanking her for her love, her care. And then she dissolves into the energy of our heart centers. Just returning our attention now back to the seat under us, noticing the weight of our bodies making contact with the seat, allowing that sensation to begin to ground us, to gently invite us back into this moment, back to the relative. And then from there, allowing ourselves just to move through some simple, gentle movements to begin to awaken the body. Oh, all right. Um, so we have some time for questions. You can put those questions into the ask a question box. And it can be a question about anything too. It doesn't have to be topical. If I don't have to be topical, you shouldn't have to be topical. Speaking of topics, see, there's a question: would you consider distortions of the mind as chaos? Well, it's only chaos if we're consumed by the chaos. Everyone's mind is distorted, but then what is our relationship to that distortion? You know, one of my practices, for instance, is to recognize that I just have all these opinions about people. I have all these assumptions about who people are and what people are. I see that if I'm like out in public spaces and I look at people and say, "Oh, I wonder," I'll just make up stories about them. You know, um, in that moment, I can recognize that I'm just making up stories, and that actually helps me from being consumed by this illusion that what I'm thinking is actually the truth. It's not the truth, it's an assumption I'm making about people. So I'm not consumed by it, but it's happening. So it's, do I know that there's distortion, and can I hold the space for that distortion? Even if I find myself being trapped by it, I can still say, yeah, I'm trapped by this distortion. It's not true, but I'm still here. Like when you walk into the hole, you fall into the hole, and you're like, yeah, I'm in the hole. The issue is that when people don't know that they're in a hole, you know. Um, there are many things that I've had to work through where I'm just like, I know the choice that I'm making. I know why I'm making it, but I'm making it anyway. I know that I shouldn't be making it, but that's where we start. That's a place to start to know um, what we're choosing. How do we hold the contradiction that keeps us from feeling cared for? This is a lifelong, literally a problem. It's a literal lifelong problem. Yeah, how do we hold the contradiction that keeps us from being cared for? Well, we can definitely hold the contradiction, or we can go to the fear that keeps us from being cared for. Um, Now, holding space, as I was saying, holding space is, yeah, it's the base, it's the foundational practice where we have to begin. But the continuation of the practice to transform means that we begin to respond to things in a way that's compassionate and clear. You know, oh, contraction. How do we find the contraction? Do we find the contraction that keeps us from being cured? The contraction, yeah, the fear is the contraction. Like that's fear. Contraction is just the fear. You're shutting down around the fear. The fear is actually an energy that absorbs energy. So fear is like a vampire in the mind. It's just like it takes energy away from other parts of the mind, particularly energy around work to get free. So fear absorbs that, and then we get drained and we shut down around the fear, and the fear becomes a cyclical existence. It's a cyclical experience that we don't work out of. We can't find a way to work out of. Um, and then, as Majaya used to say, you have to consume it. You have to consume um, whatever it is we consider to be chaos, right? So fear can be our chaos. You consume it, you hold the space for it, and you recognize, oh, I'm reacting to fear, but I'm not responding to the fear. I'm just reacting to it. But when I start responding to the fear, I say, you know what? I feel the fear. I'm looking at the context in which the fear arises. I'm looking at my situation, and that fear doesn't align with, the reality of the situation. In this situation, I'm being cared for, and I actually need to push through the fear to be cared for. And you have to experience the discomfort of care, which is also keeping us from really drinking in care. We have to experience the discomfort of what it's like for someone to take care of us. Right? To experience the discomfort, and then to move into like really deeply drinking into that care that someone's offering you. How is consuming different? How is consuming different than observing and being curious? Sorry, consuming different than observing and being curious. So we're observing, being curious, and then I'm making a choice not to get swallowed in it. You know, um, Sometimes getting curious about something opens the door for us to get eaten up by it. That's that's kind of the subtle danger. of getting curious about something. You get close to the water, then you slip in. But sometimes we see something, we hold the space, and then we change directions. We go somewhere else. you know, I don't have to deal with the fear. I know where the fear is going to take me. So therefore, I'm going to make the choice to be free instead of trying to figure out the fear. Like that. That would be something that we can do to consume it. I think even further, it's now when you get into these higher levels of practice, then you literally begin to eat the chaos, metabolize it, and then shit it out and transform it into something else. Now that's high level tantra that many of us aren't doing, aren't really working on quite yet. But initially holding space, observing, making different choices. And then once you get into these higher masteries of energy, then you're actually just literally transforming fear into something else. This is what we would do in Cha, for instance. This is what we do in Gana Chakra practice. This is what we do in Fire Puja, is transforming the energy. So that consuming, the higher level, the higher practice of consuming is actually looking at something that we've been terrorized by, and then in just a moment, just transforming into something else and saying, need to transform this energy into something that I can use to get free. That's when we transform trauma into Tara, or we transform terror into Chinrezi. That you begin to say, oh, that energy is just the expression of the deity itself. Can you talk about how we can lean into mothering ourselves when we haven't had a good role model for loving ourselves from our own mother? I'm working to unwind from the mean mommy voice that I internalized from my mother's fear-based control when I was growing up. Yeah. Um, and I think that's all the practices that we've been talking about is definitely something that comes into play here. Sometimes literally we have to find a new mother. you know? I'll tell you this, my own mother, I have an excellent relationship with my mother, actually. But she had a difficult relationship with her parents. My grandmother, but with my grandmother, my mother's mother, I had a really good relationship. She didn't have the best relationship. So that's really, it's interesting how generations change relationships too, that like our grandmothers, like we may have excellent relationships with our grandmothers, but our parents may have a horrible relationship with their parents. But anyway, she also had a really hard relationship with her father, and I did too. I had a terrible relationship with my grandfather, my mother's mother. And she had a lot of trauma around that. It was a lot of trauma for both of us, actually, for both of us. I noticed that as we got older, my mother took on, like, one of her male mentors. She took on that mentor relationship as a father-daughter relationship. And that was something she worked out with her mentor, that she would begin to see him as an example of a father figure that she didn't have, in order to begin to heal those wounds around fathering. And it worked. And it really, actually, I saw it over the years really heal her from the woundedness um, of fathering. Um, and for me, I found some of those kinds of relationships with teachers, um, but I began to over time also recognize that I have these qualities for me in this case of the father, of what it meant to be a nurturing, kind father figure for myself. And I began to take refuge in those qualities that I found in myself. And that began to heal and to reverse the wounds really around patriarchy, right? Wounded around patriarchy for me. So, anyhow, it's sometimes we need to latch on to an embodied example of an actual mother figure in our lives. This is why elders are so important. Um, this is why like mentee mentor relationships are really important. But these things have to be negotiated as well. You just can't just do it. You have to talk to the person and say, "This is how I'm holding this relationship," uh, as well. Um, and again, bringing the practices in, holding space for that voice when it comes up, looking at all the energy and the baggage around that voice, holding space for it. You know, understanding that there's spaciousness and therefore there's the mother, the actual mother, right? This universal consciousness that is nothing but love that's holding everything. And we have to start choosing to be in a relationship to that spacious lovingness instead of the thoughts and the suffering. Yeah. So, can you say something about patterns that show up in this incarnation that have also shown up in previous incarnations, and whether extra work, particular work, is needed to shift these? Well, I think that when we talk about these patterns, some of these patterns are multi lifetime patterns that take a long time to work out as well. And what we're doing life after life, I think, is well, trying to reduce, the creation of patterns that contract and bind us to samsara and disrupting these patterns and disrupting those same patterns. Um, What did I just say? So, life after life, we're disrupting the patterns that bind us to samsara, right? We're trying not to create more patterns that bind us, and we're trying to create patterns of liberation that are angled towards freedom, liberation. Um, I think that if you notice a certain pattern and that if you recognize that this pattern has been prevalent for past lifetimes, then I would say, yeah, I think you could actually direct extra work to it. You know, absolutely. And I would say, I say this all the time. Meditation in Buddhism isn't the only path of liberation. There are many indigenous-based practices in the world, and Tibetan Tantric Buddhism is an indigenous practice, by the way. It's like a lot of indigeneity in how we're practicing. But there are other paths, other traditions, and just to look at that, to just kind of take a survey and say, okay, what's out here? You know, um, y'all know that I'm a plant medicine practitioner, and I wasn't necessarily a believer in plant medicine. I wasn't a hater, but I wasn't definitely. When you come up in like these really strict meditation circles, they're like, meditation can solve everything, and it can't actually. Um, Meditation doesn't fix everything. There's a lot of things that meditation will not fix, and so when I got involved with plant medicine practice, that really helped me to really dig into some old, deep karmic patterns that I would have never have gotten to through therapy or even through meditation or therapy. I wouldn't have ever gotten into to undoing and working with. You know. Um, and our patterns of liberation in this life and whatever life we're working on it, right, is it looks differently for everyone, right? Again, it's like it's choosing the space instead of the contraction over and over and over again. It's choosing, it's consciously choosing to move into where it hurts so we can tend to the hurt by offering it space and by allowing ourselves to really experience the hurt and to let that energy move on, to let that energy go. Yeah. And colonization is colonization or patterns are deeply ingrained in our being, in our minds, and in our bodies. You know, and sometimes we over romanticize exactly what decolonizing is. We actually begin to objectify and over romanticize and manipulate the idea of indigeneity. So indigeneity just becomes this other thing that we're trying to do to feel good about ourselves, um, which inherently turns out to be anti-indigenous, essentially. Um, and I'm not trying to say we shouldn't be doing this, but I'm saying that like there's a it's we have to be very careful not to keep bullshitting ourselves and bypassing the real work, by just talking about the work. Um, you will find that so much of the work of liberation is done alone and in silence and off of social media. If you want to know if you're doing real decolonizing work, do you talk about it? Are you posting about it? Like it takes a level of aloneness and stillness to deprogram the brutality of control and repression and silencing, which is what colonization is repression, is silencing, it's erasure. And we have to call on the stillness to invite our most authentic self back into the world, back into our body. Indigeneity is about sustainability. It's about sustainability, I think, with the elements. It's like being in a really direct relationship to, we would say primarily the earth. Like, how am I in relationship to the earth? How do I see my body as an extension of the earth and vice versa, right? How do I start living in a really simple way? And living simply doesn't necessarily mean that like you live off the grid or you don't have shit. I don't necessarily want to live off the grid, and I like shit. So, um, but that's not about living simply. Simply living simply, being simple is like how are we our most authentic self, and how do we through our expression of our most authentic self understand when we're over consuming, when we shouldn't be over consuming. When we're not ourselves, we're over consuming to distract ourselves from the discomfort of not being ourselves, the discomfort of being other than we really are. And that is one of the symptoms of capitalism. It's like we are being taught to be other than ourselves, you know. And that will all make us really countercultural. Like that will put us in conflict with the culture. That's going to put us in conflict with people around us. You're getting somewhere when you're in conflict with people. When you can't sustain old relationships. Like if you want to do really intense work like this, you have to be ready to give up things. Like relationships, identities, um, your name, for instance. Um, there's a way in which you begin to live in the world, but you're no longer of the world. But someone looking at you may not even tell the difference. Like they may not even know, but you're living differently. I used to give this teaching all the time. I have to like dig it up, but it's a way that in which we begin to occupy another level of vibration. So we begin to live on a higher vibrational level in the world. And people who are sensitive to that vibration, to that energy, can sense that. Most people are not sensitive, or at least they're not paying attention to that sensitivity, which is usually the case. People are just really distracted and aren't paying attention to their senses, their intuition. The people who are in tune to their intuition will know you, will see you very clearly what you're doing. You can't hide from people like that. hmm That's right, Karen. Like, woe to you if everyone speaks well of you. Um, it's very true. It's just like me. It's like I'm not everyone's teacher, nor am I trying to be everyone's teacher. I'm actually not trying to be anyone's teacher. Matter of fact, I'm just trying to offer something back to you so you don't feel as if you have to reinvent the wheel to get free. This is going to take up time. you know, um, so like people come to me, oh, Lama Rod, you're making up shit and blah blah blah. It's just like but I'm happy. I'm doing good work. I'm being held by mentors and other people who are holding me accountable. It's like, to an extent, you have to surround yourself with people who love you, who can also tell you the truth as well. These are the people that you need in your life. You just don't need friends and elders and mentors. You need people who love you enough, to tell you the truth. You know, both love and truth, as well. I hate to quote Gandhi, but here we go. Here's Gandhi. Love and truth together creates this force. It creates this force. Speaking of contradictions, in people, right? So, but I found that to be a really powerful teaching. Truth and love together create a force. And that force is really about liberation. There's no freedom without truth or love. So get invested in the patterns of freedom, right? Of liberation. You know, how do you keep walking into the hole over and over and over again? You know, at some point you have to stop listening to the voices that are telling you that you're shit. I mean, at least I did. I had to get to this point where I was like, okay, there are the voices, and then I'm choosing not to invest in those voices anymore. You can't do that without support, without love, without feeling connected. Again, this is why a practice like the seven homecomings is really important. You need to be held and supported and feel like you belong to something in order to lean into this level of deep, deep wounding, you know. Yeah, and I'm also really lucky too because my whole life I've had the ability to move through a lot of like fear. Like I can move through fear, not easily, but when I apply practice, I move through it really easily. And I'm not easily, but I move through it. But another way that fear has operated is through prejudice, discrimination, and having beliefs that have kept me from accessing certain practices. And I'm really glad. I, as someone who was raised Black in the deep South and Bible Belt, I grew up with a really limited worldview. And this is before the internet. I didn't have internet until I went to college, right? And that was like the first time, like people, we didn't even know what the internet was when I was like 19. you know, really the internet, only thing we did on the internet was like watch porn back then. Not that some of us still don't, but definitely back then. But, we, I grew up with a limited worldview. I just had the library, to get information on TV, right? I just couldn't pick up my phone and like dispute something that I was told, So yeah, anyway, I had a really limited worldview. I had a lot of fear, and I've been really grateful because step by step I've been led into these practices of liberation, and I've met a lot of different teachers and practitioners, and that have taught me something about how to be free, how to be myself, how to be happy, and my mind stays open. I mean, I had a close friend who was a Satanist in graduate school who taught me so much actually about being yourself. She also taught me a lot about Satanism as well. But like, you just get to this point where you're like, whoa, like I'm like friends with a Satanist who's like amazing and badass and really wise, and that's it. you know, the world is complex, but that complexity doesn't have to mean it's hard. What was the complex? And the complexity doesn't mean difficulty, right? It doesn't. It's just I don't align those two things together. It's complex. It just takes work. It doesn't mean it's not difficult necessarily or impossible. But you have to understand that the world isn't black and white. None of this is black and white. There are, you know, there are things that look violent and harmful and overwhelming, but they're actually forces of good, right? I.e., tantra and wrathful beings, right? If you sit with Lama Justin in the wrathful being practice, and even Sha to an extent, but the Dharma protectors are all like demons and monsters, and you know, but they're like agents of liberation and virtue at the same time. That's the complexity that we're talking about. You have to be ready to be disrupted because, as we would say growing up in church, you're going to miss your blessing if you're always judging things by how they look. You're going to miss your blessing. We have to learn to peer into the nature of things. We have to learn to read the energy. Like, we have to learn to be intuitive, and begin to sense other ways that phenomena is communicating with us, speaking with us. Okay, well, that's it. Let's transition. We're already about 30 minutes behind. So we're going to transition into sitting practice. Please take a break if you need to take a break. But I'm just gonna go right into our practice, Mahamudra. Um, so yeah, feel free to take a break. And I know that some people join specifically to do to sit. So we're just gonna go right into that and just come in and out as you need to. Um, all right. So we're just gonna just start with just the first level here of practice, um, which is actually we're gonna put some of the stuff that we've been talking about into practice. So noticing, uh, naming, owning, experiencing, the basic practice style for love and rage. We'll just move to that, and then we want to move into maybe some very simple transformative energy, very simple. Um, not anything super ceremonial and ritual, just some simple like let's figure out how to do some simple flipping of energy in our minds, particularly. Okay. So again, coming back, if you're practicing, coming back into a position that feels appropriate for you for practice. Again, moving into our intentions. Where are we practicing? Whom are we practicing for? And then when you're ready, actually turning our attention to gratitude and devotion practice now. Again, just reflecting on gratitude for something or someone, or reflecting on how we are the recipients of kindness and labor from countless beings for our well being. So allowing that energy of gratitude and devotion for teachers and lineages, for the kindness of those, to really begin to open the heart center. And that kind of evoking of those qualities of gratitude really actually, in a way, allow the mind to get a little more fluid and open. It relaxes the fixation on thoughts and emotions and physical sensations as well. But resting within that energy of gratitude, letting that energy of gratitude hold you, take care of you. Right? And when you're ready, turning attention back into the mind and just beginning to check in, to notice what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and naming what you see as well, as an effort to really pull us into this present moment. And when you're ready, transitioning into experiencing some of this content material in your mind, just beginning with the mind, we'll move to the body later on. In the same way we've been talking about in the last session, like what does it mean to turn our attention into an emotion? What does it mean to feel that emotion without reacting? Where does the emotion, the energy of the emotion show up for us? Just moving from emotion to emotion, thought to thought, just feeling the energy, noticing the pleasantness or the unpleasantness of the emotion, noticing our relationship to that energy, letting go of reacting, just allowing the space to hold everything. whenever you need to, just refreshing your meditation through stretching, getting some water, whatever it may be, and coming back to the seat, continuing with a little more intentional experiencing of content or material in our minds. let's move into, again, refreshing up your practice. We're going to transition into more some of the spaciousness. So when you come back into your practice, beginning to imagine that the mind itself is like a wide open, spacious sky. The sky is bright, and that brightness is the inherent um, awareness of the mind. That brightness is the clarity, the light of the mind itself. And then through this sky or the clouds of thoughts and emotions, and just see each thought, each emotion that you've been working with, just as a cloud, a white fluffy cloud passing through the bright sky of your mind, and just watching it, letting it float, but also noticing the space in between all the clouds. The sky isn't overcast, just like there are just a few clouds passing through the sky, like on a bright sunny day that we would notice outside. The wide open, spacious, boundless quality of the mind with this awareness, this like sun and light radiating throughout the sky. And these clouds of thoughts and emotions just one by one floating through the sky of the mind, and just letting that floating happen. Well, we're going to slowly start transitioning out of our practice. I want us to begin by first shifting our attention to the seats, to our seats, noticing the weight of our bodies making contact with the seat under us, allowing that sensation to ground our attention, bringing us back into this relative moment. And we dedicate the energy of this practice to the liberation of all beings, that all beings may one day have the opportunity to practice understanding their own minds so that they may continue towards unsurpassable enlightenment. Just beginning to awaken the body with a few simple movements. All right. Thank you all so much for your practice. And I hope that the rest of the day is joyful and restful, and that you continue to do whatever you can to be well. And I'll see you tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for our regular Medicine Buddha practice. Thank you all so much. I'm sorry, 7 p.m. Yeah, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our Medicine Buddha practice. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.